Now, people spend their lives chasing mirages with their money. And they think, if only I had more money, then I'd be happy. See, they run out of money before they run out of mirages. And so there's just this feeling, just get me more, get me more, get me more, and then I'll really be happy. But Solomon was someone who had mega wealth. And you read that book of Ecclesiastes, and what a book for our day. What a book to understand, because here's a man who said, I had everything. I had everything materially. I had everything that a person could have, and I pursued pleasure. And he said, I denied myself nothing my heart desired. And then he said, but it was all vanity. It was all emptiness. Because Solomon, with his mega wealth on a Bill Gates type scale, chased down every mirage, but in his case, one of the few people in history, he ran out of mirages before he ran out of money. And so he knew that they couldn't bring happiness, that they couldn't satisfy. And he said, naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes, so he departs. He takes nothing from his labor that he can carry in his hand. In other words, you can't take it with you. John D. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest men that ever lived, after he died, a journalist asked John D.'s accountant, how much money did John D. Rockefeller leave? And his reply was classic. He said, well, he left all of it. And we all do, don't we? We leave it all behind because we can't take it with us. And in Matthew chapter 6, and if you've got Bibles, and turn to Matthew chapter 6, and if you don't, I'll just read it for you. Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. Listen to this, because this is a paradigm shift. This is something that can change your life and free you. It can switch your center of gravity. And it is something very exciting. And Jesus said, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. There your heart will be also. So where do you want your heart to be? Well, put your treasures there, and your heart will follow. Now notice what Jesus says in this passage. He says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Why does he say that? Does he say because that's a wrong thing to do? That's an evil thing to do? No. What he says is, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth because they're not going to last. Because it doesn't make sense. Moth and rust and dust, and you could add earthquakes and fire and everything else. We're going to be parted from our treasures. One way or the other. Either our treasures will be taken from us while we're still alive, or we'll die and leave our treasures behind. But all of our earthly treasures, we're not going to have a permanent, eternal relationship with. We are going to be split apart from them. And just look at junkyards and look at graveyards, and they tell that story. So what Jesus is saying is not, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth because that's evil. What he's saying is, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth because that's stupid. It doesn't make sense. It's really a pragmatic argument. Then he goes right on to say, do store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Why? Because that's the right thing to do? Because that's the virtuous thing to do? Well, sure, it is right and virtuous, or he wouldn't have commanded us to do it. But what's his argument? His argument is, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven because moth and rust and dust are not going to destroy them. Thieves are not going to break in and steal them. Fires aren't going to burn them. Earthquakes aren't going to take them down. In other words, lay up treasures in heaven, not simply because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. And you think about that. That's a big theme in Scripture, smart and stupid. You read the whole book of Proverbs, and that's what it's about. In fact, I may do a life-change book with Multnomah called The Smart and Stupid Principle, because really, that's true. You read Proverbs, and it's not just Proverbs. Proverbs is wisdom and foolishness. Isn't that smart and stupid? In the book of Deuteronomy, it's blessing and curse. Which are you going to choose, the blessings or the curse? Blessings, isn't that smart? Curse, isn't that stupid? And so Jesus is making it's a spiritual argument, but in a different way, because it's a very pragmatic argument. It's an argument to do a thing because it's smart, because in God's design, the right thing to do is always the smart thing to do. And in God's design, the wrong thing to do is always, ultimately, the stupid thing to do. And though the most important thing in the universe is the glory of God, not our personal happiness, the irony is when we finally set aside the agenda of our personal happiness, it's not about me, it's about Jesus, and then we follow him wholeheartedly, guess what God throws into the package? Our happiness. Have you noticed that? Isn't that true? And it's confirmed over and over again in Scripture.